Assalamu alaikum everyone. Now usually on this channel we talk about all things to do with money, investments and finance. But today I want to share with you something a little bit different but hopefully as beneficial and is very personal to me. How to memorize the Qur'an step by step. You see, I memorized the Qur'an by the age of 14. I got started at the age of 7 and then subsequently I got an ijaza in riwayah Hifdh and Asim from a sheikh in Egypt when I was 18. But my journey was not easy, and over the years I got taught by about 8 different teachers, some great, some not so great. And I self-taught myself and I learned from the teachers as well a whole bunch of techniques on how I could memorize faster. And by the end of my memorization journey, I could memorize an entire page in around 6 minutes. And over the last few months, I have come full circle and started teaching my 6-year-old son, Sulaiman. Sulaiman ko Ameen.
Ameen.
Ameen. Good boy. Good boy. Eid Mubarak. And what I realized was that there's actually a real craft and a skill set to memorization that I'm teaching him that will make his Hifdh journey far easier than mine was. And in this video, I'm going to share exactly what I'm teaching my son with you as well. I'm going to break it down step by step how to go from just starting out on your Hifdh journey all the way to nailing it as a complete Hafidh. And frankly, even if you're not memorizing the Qur'an at all, the memorization techniques we will cover should pretty much help anyone out in any walk of life. The very first thing we need to discuss before we even get into the nitty-gritty of how to memorize is what is the game plan here. So I would recommend starting from the 30th juz, perhaps picking off the 29th juz as well, but then I would stop and I would go to the first juz and continue on from there until you finish. I was taught by subcontinental teachers and they taught me that there are 3 fundamental things that you will be doing as a memorization student: sabak, sabki and dor. Sabak is the new material that you learn every lesson and recite to your teacher. It might be half a page, it might be a few lines, it might be 1 page. Sabki is the revising of all of the recent material that you have learned, the last few pages, typically from the same juz, the same chapter that you are memorizing at the time. So for example, if you are on page 6 of juz 5, the first 5 pages of juz 5 would be your sabki. Dor is your long-term revision. You would typically want to be doing about half a juz to a full juz every time and cycling through all of the historic juz that you have committed to your memory. Now in terms of your daily and weekly routines, this is how I would do it. For your daily routine, I would have 45 minutes memorization in the morning focused on your sabak, the new stuff. So you'd have a class for 2 to 3 hours. We used to have a class for 3 hours in the evening where you revise your sabak that you've learned in the morning and then you recite it to your teacher, and you're only allowed a maximum of 2 mistakes. After that, you don't really know it and you should be sent back and to do it again until you only have 2 mistakes at max and ideally no mistakes. Then in the same class, you start working on your sabki and your dor. For your sabki, you should always revise your last 3 sabaks, i.e. your last 3 new pieces that you have learned. And then you should cycle through the different quarters of that same juz you are in as part of your sabki. Let me give you an example. So let's say you are in the 8th juz, you're halfway through the 3rd quarter of the 8th juz. So you would definitely be revising your last 3 sabaks, which would basically be everything from the half onwards. And then you would do 1 of the other 2 quarters from the first half that you've already memorized. And then the next day, you'd again do your last 3 sabaks and you would pick off the other quarter from that same juz. For dor, you really want to be doing about half a juz at a time while you are still under 10 juz memorized, because that way you can cycle through everything you know in about 20 lessons. But once you're past 10 juz, you really should be reading 1 juz at least of revision every single lesson, because you now have much more to cover every single time. Of the 3, sabak, sabki, dor, your sabki is actually the most important. Learning new stuff is actually quite easy after a while, as this is just your short-term memory, and dor is just refreshing on stuff that is already in your long-term memory. But sabki is the stuff that is transitioning from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. That's why it's hard. And sometimes you will revise something something that you have learned, and you will feel like you're having to learn it all over again, and it can even feel harder the second time round. But that's fine, that's how it should be. After class, you should spend about 30 minutes or so just looking at your next sabak. You may not necessarily learn it very well because you're not fresh, but at least you've got your eye in and you've got the general gist of what you're going to learn. So all in all, you probably end up spending about 4 hours a day memorizing. No one said it was going to be easy. Every week, I would recommend lessons at least 3 times a week, but ideally 4 to 5 lessons a week. Keep that up and you should be done in about 3 to 4 years. You can chill out a bit and do a little bit less and you get it done in about 7 to 8 years, but genuinely it is better to go harder and faster, as that way you will learn it more easily whilst you're younger, and your memorization is a muscle, so you would rather train it hard and make sure that you get it done quickly, and overall your hifdh will be stronger as a result of that as well. And folks, I know this might sound daunting and overwhelming and you might feel that you're not up for this right now. Don't worry too much about that. Just get it started and just start the routine, and actually you will find that it's very, very doable. Memorization is absolutely compatible with everyday schooling. It's just a little bit harder work, and I would recommend doing it this way and not taking that time out of school for just doing hifdh for a few years, because that sets you back educationally as well. And every time you finish a juz, you shouldn't continue on until you've fully revised and read that entire juz together in its entirety to someone. The tolerance for mistakes is up to you and your teacher, but I would probably only allow 3 mistakes per quarter, if that, and ideally you would want to have less than 3 mistakes for the entire juz. Every time you finish 5 juz, it's worth just taking a few weeks to focus exclusively on Dor and tightening up all of the historic stuff before continuing onwards, because every 5 juz it's a bit of a landmark and you want to tighten everything up. Okay, now we know the macro game plan, let's actually get into the mechanics of memorization of verses themselves. The basic idea is absolutely nailing the pronunciation and how you recite the verse the first time, because that will just stick in your memory regardless. So make the first time the right time. And then once you've got the pronunciation right, take things in very small chunks, individual words, and add on more words each time as you are reciting and repeating, and lots and lots and lots of repetition. I would typically recommend 10 times each verse. Let's take a verse and I'll talk you through exactly how to memorize this verse. So this is a random verse from Surah Naml. The verse is قَالَ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ. I might recite the entire verse the first time. قَالَ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ أَيُّكُمْ يَأْتِينِي بِعَرْشِهَا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَأْتُونِي مُسْلِمِينَ. So the way I would memorize this is I would say قَالَ يَا أَيُّهَا. As you get more experience, you'll be able to take bigger chunks at a time. But you might be starting off, you might just have those 2 words. قَالَ يَا أَيُّهَا. And then you would just repeat that. Ya ayyuhal. You might be struggling with that word, so you might say that a few times. Qala ya ayyuhal mala'u. Qala ya ayyuhal mala'u. Ayyuhal mala'u. Ayyukum ya'tini. Qala ya ayyuhal mala'u. Ayyukum ya'tini. يأتيني بعرشها يأتيني بعرشها يأتيني بعرشها. Okay, I've got that bit now. Let me join it all together. قال يا أيها الملأ أيكم يأتيني بعرشها. And then I might do the last bit. قبل أن يأتوني مسلمين. قبل أن يأتوني مسلمين. And then I join it all together. قال يا أيها الملأ أيكم يأتيني بعرشها قبل أن يأتوني مسلمين. And then I would test myself. I would look away and I would be like, okay, قال يا أيها الملأ أيكم يأتيني بعرشها قبل أن يأتوني مسلمين. And then I would move on to the next verse and I would do exactly the same thing, and the verse after that. And then what you would do is you would keep on joining the verses together themselves. So as you can see, in a way, the micro is just a reflection of the macro. You are adding on new things into your super short short-term memory, that's your kind of like your mini sabak, and then you're looking to connect it with the stuff that's already in your more longer-term memory. And if you are making mistakes, stop. You need to get that verse right. When you're doing your sabak, you really need to be able to pull through all of it with no mistakes, completely clean. And you need to get to that standard. Unless you're at that standard, then there's no point moving on and doing things, and it's a bit of a car crash. You're kind of forgetting stuff as you go along. That's not good enough. Okay, so we've now covered the mechanics of actually memorizing, but there's a whole load of other tips that will really assist you in memorizing faster. The first tip is listen to a reciter before you recite. This will really ensure that you get the pronunciation right, and will also improve your quality and sound of recitation, as you'll be copying someone who has a beautiful voice and who has got great tajweed. The second tip is make sure you're learning properly using all of your senses. So start building a mental picture of the page that you are memorizing. Every good Hifdh can tell you which side of the page a new surah starts and which side of a page a certain verse is as well, because you see what you are doing is live problem solving. When you are reciting, you are live problem solving. Your mind is trying to work out what comes next, and you want to train your mind with all the possible clues and hooks and levers it can use to build that picture. For some of you, it might just be because it's like a song, right? You just naturally know it and you're going to recite it. For other situations, you might need to be using your analytical brain, and you're like, okay, so this is the first time this comes up, so the second time it must come up is this verse, and you then say that verse. And for other people, it might be that you're just literally picturing it. You're like, okay, I've hit this verse and I'm at the bottom of the page, and I know at the top of that page is this new verse. And so you use a different kind of technique to make sure that you are on track and you are live problem solving this entire time. This is a cheeky one. It's not really one that actually is going to make your hifdh better, but if you're reading to your teacher, I actually got really good at reading the body language of the teacher, because the teacher will react when you're about to make a mistake, so you can pick out the mistake that way. And you know, usually if you're a hafidh, you will know that it's one of two options, and if your teacher is reacting badly to one of the options, you know it must be the other option. But of course that's not a great way to do hifdh, so don't necessarily take that tip on. Another tip is that in the Qur'an there are certain verses and phrases and words repeat themselves regularly. This makes it much easier to memorize, and also a little bit harder to memorize as well if you do it wrong, because you can get confused between different sections. So the way to take advantage of this and make it easier to memorize is be smart and understand from the get-go the differences between the two different points where a certain verse or certain phrases are being used. So for example, Ya Bani Israel Adhkuru is used 3 times to start a verse in the first juz. Don't try to just brute force it. Understand what are the specific differences between each of the 3 types that are being used. The first one is on the left side of the page, the second one's on the right side of the page, the third one's quite far, towards the end of the juz on the right side of the page on a 13-line Qur'an, is how I remember it. And I know that the first one is Awfu bil ahd, second one is Anni wa Anni, and then this third one is also Anni Faddaltukum, and then there's a tweak in the line after that. So that's how you understand that there are differences between the verses that are very similar. Another absolute must, in my opinion, is that you must read the English translation of the verse before you start memorizing it. Even if you don't understand Arabic, you are reading English, and it will give you an access into the verse that in a way that you just wouldn't otherwise have. So for example, the verses that we were reciting earlier, قَالَ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأُ أَيُّكُمْ يَأْتِينِي بِعَرْشِهَا قَبْلَ أَنْ يَأْتُونِي مُسْلِمِينَ. You would be able to recognize potentially the arsh is the throne, and muslimin is another very common word that Muslims will know. So qala, for example, is he said, and you would know that that's right at the start of the verse. And this is particularly powerful when the Qur'an is narrating stories, as then you really easily just follow the story, and it becomes much easier to memorize that as well, as many huffadh will find. Another powerful tool I use to great success is to time yourself on how long it takes you to memorize a page. As I said earlier, by the time I ended my memorization, a page would take me approximately about 6 minutes or less. This is because by the time you get to the end of the Qur'an, every new page will have at least a few verses on that page, so you've already partially memorized some way, shape or form in other bits of the Qur'an. But what this timing of you memorizing will teach you is to go at your memorization full tilt, rather than be distracted and rather than be confused or looking elsewhere. You are really focused and trying to beat your time, and anything done fully is always the best way to do that thing in any case. And you trying to improve your memory by trying to beat your time previously is like a little gamification of the task as well, so it makes it a little bit more fun as well. Another really easy tip is just having a few juz of recitations in the Qur'an and playing those on repeat. especially for your kids. You'll be so surprised by how much you and the kids just pick up through passive listening. And when you recite, you should try and be melodious in the inflections of your voice, as again, your ears will listen to yourself. And if it's an interesting, nice to hear sound, you will just end up remembering it better. And when you start reading it, because you've got this nice intonation and you've got these uphills and downhills, you will just recite it in that same way, and you will find another way orally, i.e. by sound, to be able to track your way through. And it's like another hook through which you can navigate yourself and problem solve on the fundamental question in memorization of what comes next. The final tip is that I sincerely believe that you do need to have, for Qur'an memorization, a teacher, a mentor, or a colleague whom you will recite to and who will hold you accountable and who is willing to put in the time with you over several years. I know people do manage to do it on their own, but the vast majority will, unless they have a teacher, they will just end up giving up if they try and do it on their own. So try and join some kind of program or class, or even do it with a particular teacher, but make sure that it's someone that is committed to do it with you for the long haul. That's it for today, folks. I hope you find this slightly different type of video helpful and useful. If you were here for the money token and wondering what on earth has happened, then use this as a moment to look into the Quran and start revising and maybe even memorizing new stuff that you haven't already memorized. And if you were here for the Hifdh tips, then know that we're not probably going to talk about lots and lots of further Hifdh tips on this video. We are going to talk about investment stuff too. Do check that out, and I'm hopefully as useful on that topic as I am on this one. I mean, you'll be the judge of that. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.